Phantasy Star Online 2 New Genesis is a fresh starting point for this game, and something that I am deeply interested in because, as you know, right, I love the original Phantasy Star Online and was devastated that we never got an official localized version of it over here, and then we finally got it like 8 years later, and I played it and I kind of completely bounced off of it in like this heartbreaking way.
Hmm.
Because the way that I can describe it is I felt like I was starting a book at the last chapter, essentially. And then like trying to retroactively go from the last chapter to the back of the beginning of the book, which was very disorienting. It felt like, and it's not the game's fault, but it felt like I was playing a game that hadn't just come out, but had been around for 8 years, which was the
Right. Yeah.
case. And so it was just so much, it was so overwhelming. And, I think for that reason, it was hard to stick with. And what I want to say about New Genesis, and I do think that this is a very small slice of the game that they showed off in this closed beta test. And so it's hard to have a full and complete opinion. I think I'm going to need to play a lot more of the game for that. But my initial impression is that it kind of does the biggest thing that I wasn't getting in OG Phantasy Star Online 2, where I feel like I'm kind of starting on the same page as everybody else, and the game is doing
Nice.
a much better job of kind of guiding me through everything. And so there's literally, because there's so many systems in this game, and you'll get like a task, and it'll be like, okay, we're going through this specific system. Step by step, we will tell you what this is. We will tell you why it's useful. And so, by the end of the closed beta, it's like, okay, I feel like I have a good grasp on this game, which was certainly a nice feeling to have.
Yeah. I mean, just to even to have that in just a short amount of time, because I feel like, yeah, like you're saying, usually it would take a long time for all of those different kind of layers to build on top of each other.
Right.
And I could see, particularly for something like this, like you're saying, like with the original version, you jump in and it's just like, well, all this, right? And it's like, no, I don't. I have
Right.
no idea what's happening.
OG Phantasy Star Online 2, a lot of it is like you're going to a counter, you're selecting a quest, and then you're dropping into the zone and like doing that quest. This is far more like open-ended and connected. And so it's like, oh, I want to go do that thing that's over there. You can just leave the city and go and do that, right? You can just wander off and do that. And as you're going through, you'll be like, oh, that's crafting material that I need because they were talking about it in this other mechanic. Or, oh, I see a bunch of players fighting this big, tough creature. They're called dolls here. You'll go and you'll join them and you'll get a bunch of experience for doing that. Like it'll be like essentially like a world quest that you'll see, or like a fate in Final Fantasy 14. I think is a good way to describe it. And so I think that like connectiveness, that cohesion, really helps out a lot. And what I will say as a criticism though is, despite the fact that I felt like I was able to get a better grasp on the game, I still don't think the way that they teach you a lot of this stuff is all that interesting. Because it's a lot, right? Like you're going through the closed beta test, you're trying to do all these tasks. It's literally like you walk up to this blank slate of a person, you click on them, and they're like, yeah, this is how you unlock potential in your weapons. And then you'll get like text windows that you read through. And, those text windows are like not that long, but it's not like a fun contextualize
Right.
narrative driven thing that you're doing. Like it's fine, it works, it gets the job done, but I wouldn't say it's like a presentation that's going above and beyond. And so to compare it to something like Final Fantasy 14, which admittedly I think is a very different game with very different goals, like even as you're doing like your class quests, your job quests, even in the very early goings before you get advanced jobs, it's like this is an entire storyline, that no one else gets to experience, that will also, unlock you new abilities and take you farther. And so I think on a presentation standpoint, they could make it more engaging than it is. But there's There's some really cool stuff here, and I think it's very easy to get addicted to. Like there was this moment that reminded me of Death Stranding, Blood, where you
Oh,
have this regional mag, and it's like, hey, anybody can come up and dump materials into this mag, and
okay.
if we reach a certain point, everybody gets a benefit. And depending on what's going on, it's like you'll get an extra bonus if you feed it this specific type of material, like fruit. And I love when MMOs or just social games in general have those sort of mechanics where it kind of naturally encourages people to come together and contribute. And I felt that happen multiple times in my experience with the closed beta, where there would be something going on in the world that would catch my eye, and like I wouldn't party up with these people, I wouldn't talk to them, but I felt like the game was just kind of naturally guiding me along to interact with other players. Actually, I think that's something that's missing from contemporary MMOs. I think a lot of MMOs now feel just like single player games where other people happen to be around, and so
Right.
I definitely like things moving in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious because I think a lot of people, because of the timing of missed PSO2, and that's one of the big reasons that they're doing this. Um, like, does it compare that well to the original PSO, or is it really just like that world and here's a more familiar MMO layout?
Um, I think it feels like an evolution of PSO2 in a way that makes sense because we haven't gotten into the combat yet, which I think
Hmm.
is kind of the most exciting thing to talk about. But it feels like an evolution of PSO2, which in turn felt like an evolution of PSO1, albeit I think PSO2 just mechanically and system wise, because it's a game that kept getting stuff bolted onto it, is a lot more complex, at least on the surface. But PSO2, I think it's just more fun to fight things. I think the difficulty scaling is better, at least from what I've experienced, and I think the combat is just more interesting. But it doesn't. It also still doesn't feel like it's removed from those early PSO days because you're talking about like does it feel like more of the same? And I do think almost like a Muso game, right? Like on some level, the appeal of these games is its simplicity that you can just kind of pick it up and have like go kill mobs, like a lot of mobs, and have a good time. And that's still there. And they've found smart ways to add nuance without making it too complex. And so what I mean by that is I picked a hunter. I played a cast hunter for this closed beta test because I feel like hunter in my PSO mind is kind of like the basic. Like this is what you play to kind of get a taste of what's going on. And to my surprise, like you can just hold down the basic attack button and do a combo, right? And so extremely easy to understand. You have a block, you have a dash, you have a heavy attack, right? You have all these things that you kind of understand, and so like you can immediately get by and kill things and have fun. But there were really cool things that made combat fun for like multiple hours, right? Because if it was just those two things, I think you get bored pretty quickly. But with Hunter specifically, it's kind of a counterattack class where if you dodge at just the right moment, you can do a follow-up that'll do way more damage. If you block at just the right moment, you'll do a parry and you'll get a lot more damage. Like the first ability that you get, first class skill, is this Hunter's Physique, where you won't take any knockback damage, right? And so what's even worse a lot of times in New Genesis is when you get hit, it's not really the damage that's the problem. It's that your character goes spiraling, corkscrewing through the air and away from the enemy. And as a
Right.
melee-focused class, that's a huge problem because you don't feel like you're doing very much damage. So if you activate that ability at the right time, you will take damage, but you won't be knocked back. And some of these enemies have so much health that it's like, oh, I want to save it for this moment so I can really go ham on this tougher, more advanced creature. And that all that stuff taken together, right? It's not that complex, right? Like a parry system is not new to action games, but it feels so fast and fluid here that compared to typical MMO combat, It feels a lot more active and engaging. I
That's
would
cool.
say, yeah, and I think the enemy design is much better here as well. So like there are certain enemies that are like enhancer enemies. They have like this device on their back, and it's like, okay, to really damage them, you have to hit that device on their back and then capitalize and take them out. Or like you'll have flying enemies where it's like, oh, they keep harassing you with projectiles, and so you'll want to deal with them in a slightly different way. Or like you'll be attacking an enemy and their core will get revealed, and it's like, oh, you hit that and you'll do way more damage. And so all this stuff, and like then you factor in like, oh, I can charge my attacks, but that takes a lot of time. When should I do that? Like it's almost it almost kind of feels like Monster Hunter in a way, where in Monster Hunter, a big part of learning and being good about it is capitalizing on situations when they do happen, and that is very much present here as well. And so I think because like PSO2, when I jumped into it, it sort of felt like no matter what I did, I just dominated everything. And people would tell me like, oh, it gets a little bit harder later or whatever. Like, and I'm just of the belief that like you shouldn't have to spend hours and hours in a game to want to get better at it, right? Because it should be immediately engaging and fun and somewhat challenging, so you have that impetus to pump resources into upgrading your weapons, into learning skills, into all that stuff. Like that stuff has to be there for character growth to feel meaningful. And I felt that way more in what I played of New Genesis than what I got in original PSO2.
That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
In terms of like choosing classes and things like that, are you like super like committing to this is your character, or can you bounce around more?
No, you are super not committed. So you could there's like literally a counter that you can go to, and you can just swap classes. And even in the closed beta test, and I'm not sure what it'll be like in the live game, there's like this circle of people, and they are all the different classes, and you can go to them and you can do a short little quest line to kind of get a feel for the character. And so if you're, it's funny because like in my time with it, I was just happy with how the hunter was designed that I didn't really feel the need to switch. I just thought it was fun. But if you're somebody that's like, I kind of want to get a feel for everything, that is extremely easy to do. And like you can try kind of everything out before making a decision. Like it seems very flexible, kind of like 14 in that way, as another point of comparison. The other thing, Blood, that is really neat is this multi-weapon system. So you can take, so like the hunter, right, is known for using these sabers, right? And the force class, the magic class, the caster is known for using like these staves, right? And they have a completely different feel to them. What I did is I fused a staff of the same type into my sword, and now I can equip weapon skills from the staff into like my action menu and do both. So even though I was the hunter class, I was kind of getting this like multi-class system going on, and you can do that with different types of weapons as well. And I didn't get to mess around with it too much, but I just think conceptually that flexibility is really nice and allows you to kind of get a taste of different things even without changing your class. And it just gives you like, it's fun to experiment. It's just like, I wonder what will happen if I fuse these two different types of weapons together.
Were you getting like specific abilities that, you know, wouldn't exist with them singularly, or are they just like, you know, you've got a list of either or you can kind of customize?
I wasn't getting, at least my impression was I wasn't getting anything that you wouldn't get just using this weapon on its own. It was just truly a merger of these two weapons. I did, when I fused the staff with my sword, I wasn't able to use spells with it, even though I could assign them to my sub palette. And I don't know if that's like, oh, you can't use the spells unless you're a force. You can only use the weapon skills, or what the deal was there. Again, there's a lot more that I need to kind of go through and understand. But that was a little confusing, so I'll have to try to like switch classes and see what the options are and that sort of thing. What I will say, to kind of get back, to swing back into the criticisms, while I do think visually this is obviously a very noticeable upgrade from original PSO2, the way that I would kind of describe it is instead of looking like a 9-year-old game, now it kind of looks like a 4-year-old game. Like there's still kind of this roughness to it. Like you'll definitely come across some certain vistas and that sort of thing that are really gorgeous and kind of striking. And I think there's some good use of colors there. But when it comes to like character models and textures on certain things, it's just like, this just does not look great.
Is that in comparison to like games as a whole, or in comparison to other MMOs? Because MMOs just like have another set of needs, right?
Right. Yeah, and that's a totally fair point. Because obviously I think there's some long-running MMOs that this looks comparable to or probably better than, but I think it's just the impression that I'm coming from here is it's like, hey, we're doing this new thing. We're kind of doing this new reboot. We're transforming the game. I could see people who have never touched Phantasy Star come into this and being like, oh, this overhaul, like it looks fine. It's not like, it's not going to probably blow you away, I think is the ultimate impression that I want to get from here. I think it's fine. I think it's serviceable. But it's not something where it's like, oh man, this is crushing the competition with this redesign here. It does feel fantastic. So probably the most important part is like movement and attacks and all of that stuff. It was just butter. That stuff was great.
That's really great.
But PSO2, and I think this carries over into New Genesis. Maybe it's a little bit better in New Genesis. I'd have to go back and compare. The UI is so bad. It's just,
oh no,
it's just awful. Like it feels like it presents so much at you, and it's just like a task in and of itself. Sometimes I feel like to get to where you want to go, and it's just kind of a mess. And I think if you like, it's something where once you spend time with it, it becomes second nature. It's not that big of a deal, but I think it's more of a hurdle than it should be to figure things out. And
right.
For as much as I've said that, like, I felt like I got a better grasp of what was going on, I think part of that is because I played PSO2. I think some of that experience carried over into New Genesis, and I wonder if I was coming at this fresh for the first time, if I would feel even more negative about the UI. It's just kind of a clusterfuck. I think it could be cleaned up in a way that kind of draws your attention to the parts that you want to see a little bit more easily. Because it's like, you get in there and you're like, okay, I need to upgrade this weapon, and it's like, okay, well, what materials do I need? I guess like right there it tells me, but it's kind of small, and it's just like all of that stuff. You just sort of feel like you're going like this, like trying to find what you're looking for. And so I do think that could be better. You can overcome it. It doesn't take that long, but still. I think that's kind of all I've got for New Genesis. Trying to think of anything else. I guess I should say, I was telling my wife, I was like, oh, I need to, play New Genesis a little bit more. It should only be an hour. And then I spent like 2 hours playing it just because, you totally get into that classic sort of almost action RPG or MMO loot where it's like, I'm close to upgrading this weapon, or like I was going and doing this one activity and I got distracted by this other stuff. And so I think on a fundamental level, those basic hooks are definitely there. And if you're a sucker for those things, and I love those things, I can easily get pulled into those things. I think there's something for you there as well.
Very cool. Well, yeah, definitely looking forward to you getting to sink deeper into that.
Yeah.
Whenever that, do we know when that's actually
coming? 2021. I checked. I think the official website just said coming 2021. So we'll see. But very excited for it. Hopefully, it can recapture some of that classic PSO magic. Thanks, Blood.
And hopefully that will be before Endwalker.
Right. Yeah. Right.
You don't want him to hit at the same time.
Trying to catch him at 14, and they're hitting me with New Genesis. Yeah. Rough. All right. Thanks, everybody.